gonna take a swig, because I didn't know this was a thing. So the last Macabre Monday feature of the night is called the Furry Cheese Grater. I have never heard of it. I'm not in the furry community, but we're about to learn something new. Buckle up, buckaroo.
Have you ever heard a seemingly innocent phrase that you just knew meant something evil? Maybe tub girl or lemon party or the furry cheese grater? Then you may just be
Ugh, lemon party. I just remember Cars 2. Ugh. I don't want to think about Cars and lemon parties. It's so gross.
Be the victim of the darkest image in furry history. In 2007, one artist posed the question that would change the world. What would happen if you put a cheese grater inside your own butt? The answer resulted in a drawing so universally feared that it only survives through word of mouth. And
I think I have a couple of furries like in my community, so I don't know. Have any of you wondered what it would be like to have a cheese grater up your butt? I don't want to ask details. I just want, it's a yes or no question. That's all I'm wondering. Yes or no. I didn't think that anybody had this inquiry of a cheese grater up their butt. We're gonna learn. We're gonna learn some furry history. I know you wouldn't sound painful, right? Because it's so sharp. Like, if it does that to cheese, and cheese, depending on, like, the hardness, is like, does that? What would it do to your butt?
And any new links to it are quickly deleted. But why? How bad could it possibly have been?
If they drew a graphic picture of a cheese grater up a furry's butt, I think we all can assume why that is banned. I don't know. I know I have lizard brain. I've got one brain cell that like keeps rubbing itself excessively, trying to spark a thought, but I think it's pretty obvious why it would be banned.
And how did it get the artist that made it effectively booted off the internet?
This is the mystifying lore of the furry cheese grater.
Bad art history, furries, foxholes, and Nancy Pelosi. It all begins in 2007. YouTube is barely in its infancy, the first iPhone hits the market, and Nancy Nation is only getting started. But in a lesser-known corner of the internet lived the then poorly understood furry community, and all of their hard work towards mainstream acceptance would be utterly destroyed on April 20th of 2007. That day, for seemingly no reason at all, a user on adult furry website E621 posts the fetish art that will live in infamy. A rather plain digital illustration of a ferret fox.
Okay, well technically your snake hair is brains too. Yeah, but not a lot. They like, okay, all of our brain power on my head, that equals like 2 brain cells, okay? There's like 20 of them, and that's a brain cell, and there's 1 of me, and I got a brain cell. 1 + 1 = 2, which equals fish. Again, disclaimer to furries, I am not a furry. I know nothing about furry culture. I know nothing of the silly, degenerate websites you guys go to get your furry art. All I know is that they exist, and that's cool. But so does this. I'm gonna post this on YouTube, and I just tell me your experiences, tell me how you guys found this masterpiece, if you want to call it that. And the thing is, too, about furry artists, like, they are so detailed with everything. And I mean everything. I can only imagine how this was detailed. Like, how many hours did it take to just draw the butthole? I don't think you can upload this. This is already on YouTube. I might just have to put like a thing right here and call it good. Call it a day.
Fox raccoon-looking creature upside down, crying and bleeding, with an unknown third party rapidly removing a cheese grater from between his legs. The comments exploded with hatred and ironic worship because one thing was perfectly clear. Nobody liked this. But problems were already beginning to form. While dozens of users begged for the image to be taken down since it was not only hurting their eyes but their reputations, the original...
Yeah, I would have to say too, like, furries have such a terrible reputation, and none of it is really warranted because a lot of the bad reputation comes from the individuals not the whole community. So the community itself is cool. A lot of people in the community are wholesome, but just like any community, you get like one or two bad apples, it ruins everything. And I don't understand like why furry is like such a controversial community to begin with, because all they do is just have personas and dress up in fursuits. That is to say, there are certain pipelines with the furry community that the majority do not share that are pretty shitty. So no hate to the furry community. You guys are pretty cool. The shitty furries, though, you can get the fuck out. That is so wild. Okay, Amin's already declined removal, saying that some people like it. Okay, so here's my theory about that, okay? My theory is that nobody actually likes it, but one of the mods or one of the Amins probably likes it for some like weird sick way and decides to say that as an excuse.
Uploader was an admin, so he didn't have to listen to anybody. And he didn't, and while this could have just quietly lived and died on this one website, beneath anyone's notice, several users had quietly saved the image and started posting it where it really didn't belong.
A quick detour to 2005.
Dragoneer, known also as Sean-Paul Pichet, joins a relatively new website called Fur Affinity. After falling in love with the community...
Oh, I know about Fur Affinity. For what it's worth, I do have a friend that's like in the furry community and they can tell me. But no, rule of thumb on the internet, you make something so obscene or if you make something so fucking wild, it's going to get downloaded and it's going to be posted everywhere because what you post stays on there forever. And boy, do I mean forever. So it's something you might want to exercise precaution, everybody, especially if you post some saucy pictures of yourself.
Dragoneer would take ownership of the site just 2 years later. Together with artist Canine, Dragoneer came up with Fender, the ferret-fox hybrid, Fur Affinity's new official mascot and soon-to-be victim of a kitchen appliance. So by the time the faded artwork had been uploaded, Fur Affinity was one of the most recognizable faces of furries online. And though it may have set out to just be a regular art site, it was almost immediately overwhelmed with tons of porn.
The furry optics sucked.
But you may be asking yourself, this was 2007. Shock media was huge back then. It took virtually no effort to find everything from people eating poop to losing their own heads. And other than
True, and shock media is still pretty huge. I mean, it's basic internet 101, right?
than the obvious, what made this drawing that bad? It's not real. Surely there was worse stuff out there. And there was. But here's why that didn't really matter. Quick internet history. If you don't know, Encyclopedia Dramatica, ED for short, was a satirical Wikipedia-style website with articles.
I remember a lot of these. I am happy that I hid underneath a rock and I knew nothing about the furry cheese grater and other degen stuff back then. Then again, I was busy with college and school and, all that stuff. I was so young, I was so innocent, and now I know. And now I'm cursing all of you. Because if I gotta know, you guys gotta know.
About every aspect of internet culture. It still technically exists, but it goes down constantly. And like 4chan, being featured on this website in any capacity was very bad news for you. For obvious reasons, the cheese grater image was prominently displayed on articles about furry activities and online sex weirdos. Rumors exaggerating the content of the image were piling up into a living legend that was monstrous compared to the actual thing. So, this just wasn't adding up. This was not the worst furry artwork by even a mile. So why the hype? To answer that, we have to travel 1 year back to the GOAT. C. Shock images need no introduction, and I'm not giving you a deep dive, but it's important to understand that furries, regardless of what you may personally believe about them, use the internet much like anyone else. So it only follows that furries would have their own universe of shock image. And to briefly go over the more infamous ones, in no particular order: Sandy Cockbore, Spyro Subway, Two Babies, One Fox, also known as bench tails, cars banging dragons, dragons banging cars, the copy pasta about Vaporeon, a bizarre quantity of raccoon gore. Keep that one in mind. And Dorses. And the uniting factor between these, Goatsy, and the cheese grater? It's mostly fetish stuff. While there's no shortage.
Okay, I got some things to ask my furry friend then once stream is over. As a lot of this stuff I don't think I could obviously show on Twitch, no less YouTube, unless somebody already has done a video about them. So this is a well-needed introduction to this, isn't it? We're being introduced to a whole lot of stuff.
Of fetish art on the internet, the artwork that you see in memes is usually the stuff that avoids immediate detection. Inflation, transformation, the Wonder Bread guy, and much like the goat of all shock images, the cheese grater hits several emotional highs at the same time. It's gory, it's gay, it's furry, it's deeply entrenched in a subculture, and it was potentially many people's first involuntary exposure to sex.
So it was basically like the OG of furry shock porn, pretty much. Like it was like one of the big heavy hitters. I hate that I say heavy hitters, but it was like the big thing that came out back then.
Gore.
Okay.
And over the next 11 years, the cheese grater image stuck, becoming the single most downvoted furry art of all time. Just to put this in perspective for you, E621 hosted 1.5 million images of furries putting things inside their ass when this happened. People made fan art, the word cheese grater was its own meme now, thanks in part to a copy pasta so disgusting that if I read it to you, my channel would be deleted. But that backstory, much like the mythos surrounding this drawing, was just made up by a random person. But between the image itself, the shaky reputation of the community, and the borderline obsession people on 4chan and Encyclopedia Dramatica had with documenting cringe and gore on the internet, the cheese grater was simply too good to pass up. Cringe culture wouldn't even be relevant for another 10 years, but there was absolutely a growing appetite for pointing and laughing, especially at furries. But wait, I hear you say, how could I point and laugh at anything with nothing on my wrist? Luckily for us, today's video has been kindly sponsored.
Okay, that is pretty cool. I just don't like watches.
Thank you so much to Holzkern for sponsoring this video, and on with the show. But how exactly is it sexual? Calling this a fetish is a tall order when there's so much edgy art for edge's sake, so let me prove it to you. First up, the blood, humiliation, and disfigurement largely fall under the umbrella of guro, which is an adult fascination with gore.
Okay, I know about guro because when you're as old as I am, you've been on the internet for a while, you look at doujinshi, you look at, you're just there in that kind of space. So this is like, okay, so knowing the context, this is the first guro furry fetishy thing, like extreme fetishy thing that came out. Okay, that makes sense as to why it's so notorious then.
And mutilation. As of filming, E621 hosts no fewer than 14,000 images tagged as gore. So while this is by no means a popular fetish, it's definitely thriving. Second, while extremely poorly documented, there have been several notable instances of cheese-related freak phenomena. In 2013, a very normal DeviantArt user, likely inspired by the cheese
very normal quotations
grater image, wrote a fanfiction about real-life YouTube duo Dan and Phil using a cheese grater to create bacon bits out of Phil's hog. In 2014.
Oh, that is so weird. Okay, anybody who's like ever been in the fanfiction, like spear things, like what is the appeal of writing fanfiction about real people? I feel like that kind of infringes on some kind of legalities. Like, okay, remember the old Wattpad stories came out of this, like fanfiction, but there would be like kidnapped by One Direction, kidnapped by the Jonas Brothers. BTS comes to save you from being kidnapped. I understand like writing fan fiction stuff for like fictional things, because they're not real, they can't hurt you, there's nothing that can be done. But why would you write that on real people? I feel like there's some kind of lack of consent right there. And speaking of lack of consent, we got the Swiss cheese pervert breaks his silence on Life of Infamy. The sad thing is the only cheese I have in my fridge right now is Swiss cheese. I didn't think I'd be reading Swiss cheese pervert in one sentence. Alright, whew. Deep breath. Let's see what you got.
14, a Philadelphia man labeled the Swiss cheese pervert pled guilty to indecent exposure after he was caught approaching random women with a slice of cheese and asking them if they wanted to watch him rub it on himself.
What? What the fuck? What the actual fuck, dude. Ew, no. I hate it here. You earned that title. I'll never look at Swiss cheese ever again. Oh god, that's so gross. Why hasn't anybody punched him for that? Like, if there was like, if he approached a girl who's like there with a guy friend or a boyfriend, wouldn't the guy just punch him? I think one of the girls sure punched him. That is so weird and gross. Why are people like this?
What did he mean by this?
You know what he meant by
this. A
this.
German man was found covered in cheese and dead inside of a plastic bag. It was ruled an autoerotic accident. And beyond that, what few blogs exist about cheese and/or cheese grater fetishes tend to either be total word salads or completely inactive. r/quesosexuals is without content, and one of the only relevant articles about a cheese fetish clearly delineates that it is simply too obscure to be its own thing. But let's not kid ourselves here. This has very little to do with cheese and very much to do with the prevalence of shock jock behavior in the late 2000s and early 2010s internet. Most likely, the appeal of this image for people who truly get off to this stuff is the use of a dangerous object in such an intimate, humiliating, and painful way. Which brings us back again to E621 and 4chan. While E621 is no stranger to some
everything goes back to 4chan.
Pretty extreme content, it does come down hard on those who break the rules. Entire fetish categories.
What are we even talking about?
I know, she's throwing a lot at you. I hate 4chan so much. There's so much cheese. Not the good kind, but the weird kind. I feel Twitch is watching us now. Good, let them watch. They too can get cursed and know things that I didn't even want to know, but now we know. And we all gonna know. And Twitch can know too. I feel like I'm too small to get banned, really. Knock on wood. I'm sure there's a lot worse than this. Oh, this is so weird.
And specific users have been blacklisted from the site for much less. And up until 2006, 4chan and 7chan, to a much lesser extent, were more than willing to host the content that E621 considered
Sonic Jew.
Although, fun fact, there was a period of time where users on 4chan were so fed up with furry posting that they kept spamming threads with images of trains until the furries fled to 7chan, among other reasons. The cheese grater, essentially, was a perfectly engineered shock image. Unsuspecting, known by one seemingly innocuous word, largely unknown outside the furry fandom, and frightening enough for normies without crossing over into real-life gore or illegal imagery. So with all this said, where the hell did it go?
Hot cheesin'.
In 2018, over a decade after the original upload, artist CB successfully filed a takedown claim and finally got the image nuked for good. But this wasn't
fucking good, finally, thank you. Damn, it only took a decade.
Without consequence. CB's reputation had been significantly damaged, inextricably linked to this one artwork. And whether it was due to blowback or through personal choice, CB removed virtually all of their artwork from the internet and vanished without much of a trace. And the uploader of the post that
at that point, I feel like
started it all,
hold on,
an admin named Arcturus, had suffered.
Okay. I feel like at that point, you know, when you make something like that and become so notorious, you have no choice but to nuke everything. Like, get rid of the picture, get rid of digital footprint, everything. Because there's no coming back from that. I don't know how you could come back into a community after all that.
So much unrelated controversy in the following years that he, too, was eventually banned off the site. And it is kind of fucked up that Arcturus refused to take the image down, even though it wasn't his to post, for as long as he did. But somewhat unsurprisingly, the takedown didn't make the cheese grater any less relevant. And no sooner was the original post gone than dozens of reposts on various subreddits and image boards sprang up in its place.
Come
Fender,
on.
the Fur Affinity mascot, doesn't seem to have been permanently traumatized from this experience. Although I suspect that many furries, Dragoneer included, may have taken issue with such a depiction. And on a separate note, as for Dragoneer, his lifetime commitment to the furry world actually recently came to an end due to his untimely passing. And while Fender wasn't his most important contribution, it was undoubtedly iconic. And unfortunately, This is basically everything we know. In spite of the massive bloody internet footprint of this image, very little documentation remains. The idea of a ferret fox raccoon with a cheese grater wedged up his rear ended up being 1,000 times more mimetic than the drawing could ever be, which is usually how these things go. Although furries today are by no means mainstream, their online reputation has significantly improved in spite of decades of controversy, this one included. And as for the posters who gifted us this abomination, there have been very few developments in CB's or Arcturus' ends. Which is just as well, because deadass, this topic has been incredibly grating.
Okay, alright, yeah. Everybody gets a fun joke here and there. We gotcha. You're the one that had to do the hard part. You did the research. You compiled all this crap together. You're entitled to one terrible joke. As cheesy as that was. Whew. This was only a 13-minute video. 13 minutes. Could you imagine if it was a deep dive?
This has been Bad Art History.
That was terrible art. It is over. I am ready for that Ray Target Lyoko, please.